ACES is a huge playing field. A lot of us are familiar with what the Rec 709 looks like. ACES doesn't have that limit. It is effectively, for the human eye, limitless.
I'm Josh Peacock, and this is the Colorist Podcast. In this episode, I talk with Gray Marshall, Associate Finishing Artist at Technicolor. At Technicolor, Gray has worked on the films Bridge of Spies, The Revenant, Captain America Civil War, Ant-Man, and many others. But before making his way into color, Gray worked in lots of other parts of the industry. His roots were in the camera department of Star Trek The Next Generation, and later went on to be a VFX supervisor. Gray is probably best known for epic VFX shots like the building collapse at the end of Fight Club. As you'll hear, working in all these different departments has given him a unique perspective on the industry. We talk about his experience with complex color workflows, what he'd like to see in the future, Luster as a color grading platform, and why most colorists don't use a panel with it, and technologies like ACES, HDR, and VR. Hi, Gray. Thank you for joining me. I've always wanted to do a podcast with you, actually. I thought it was going to be really fun. We're good friends on the side as well, and Thank you for joining me.
Yeah, my pleasure. Thanks for asking me. But it's your fault you put the mic in front of me.
You have a unique position on all of this. You've worked in the camera department, visual effects, editorial, and most recently in color. How have you gotten over to color grading from all of those different departments?
Okay, how long is this podcast supposed to be? It all comes back to the image and art and science melding together for me. I've always known that was where it's going to be. It was simply a matter of where I was going to be doing it. So I see it in my mind as a continuity and a lot of overlap, but it's definitely an odd, strange trip, I'll admit that. I live my life more like sailing upwind in a boat than in any straight line way of doing things. I came out to Los Angeles to learn film, go to film school, bringing a computer science background with me. While in film school, I fell in love with camera. Went out, worked as a camera assistant, working my way up to DP. Got diverted at one day when I wandered into a motion control shop and became a motion control operator, combining cameras and computers for a couple years.
This was on Star Trek, right?
That was on Star Trek,
Okay.
Yes. I did there. I was one of the cameramen on Star Trek Next Generation. That was a lot of fun. It brought together a lot of what I was interested in. After I was done with the motion control, I then went on to visual effects hardcore, both at Boss Film and then at Digital Domain when they first opened up. At Digital Domain, I was brought in as a mid-level computer generalist, got involved in compositing, and then moved on up to visual effects supervisor. After that, I started my own company, Gray Matter Effects, for about 10 years, where I worked on a lot of feature films as well as a few TV shows, including Fight Club, Being John Malkovich, Adaptation, up through the movie 21. And after we closed the business of Gray Matter, I continued on as independent and worked on The Hangover and Leaves of Grass and a few other films on my own. And then visual effects business started to change. I started looking for other ways to apply what I was interested in. Found my way into editorial, was very interested in combining visual effects and editorial. And while I was pursuing that though, color correction came in front of me. And I looked at it and I immediately recognized it in my eyes as a compositing system. It was really just a way of manipulating images, just like I was familiar with in Shake and Flame and Nuke, but specialized and focused in on a specific task as well as working with a timeline. But it made instant sense to me. So I had an opportunity to work on a documentary using Resolve, loved it, and said, well, why haven't I been doing this for the past 15 years? And that kind of set me on the course.
You did visual effects for many years. Were you ever called upon to do any color correction in your shots in order to make them more believable?
Of course, that's entirely part of being a visual effects compositor, as well as the supervisor, is to have your eye, use your eye, and bring disparate pieces together. The big thing about visual effects is all visual effects people understand it's a deconstructive process first. You figure out what the pieces are, then you construct them together. And you want to do so in a way that brings all the interactions that naturally would be there into place. This includes color interaction, reflections, shadowing, and so forth. These all have to work together. Black points all have to match. White points all have to match. Midtones all have to match. Many times you bring pieces together that were maybe not even meant to be together, but you still have to make them work. So from that point of view, we're really working with the same tools, often defined a little differently. But if you look in Nuke, if you look in After Effects, you're going to see that they have fairly strong color correction tools, and maybe even more than you want as a colorist. But they are there, and they're used on a fairly regular basis. but they're used on a single shot usually, and they don't include the colorist prerogative of working an entire timeline.
It's not necessarily for continuity in the scene. It's really for that one specific shot. You could be working on that one shot for months at a time.
Those were the days, yes. I know the budgets don't support that as much anymore, and certainly speed has come up. But I think there was a shot I worked on in Fight Club, the building's collapsing at the end, that was literally 6 months. I was doing a few other things along with it,
Right.
but when I first got my hand on it, it was 6 months, and the 3D guy who was doing the collapsing buildings was on it, I think, for a year and a half. So yes, things went like that back then, and they still do to a certain degree. But we did have a sense in continuity that we wanted to make all of our shots look alike and have that across. If we had several shots, we didn't want them to be obviously disparate, but it was not the onus upon us to make it work through the entire project the way you are as a colorist.
It's interesting, too, because you were in the camera department, you went into visual effects, and a lot of color is understanding what light is doing. You did have a kind of windy path, but when you look at it in hindsight, it kind of makes sense.
I like to think so. It does. Everything I've done since I learned about camera, I do view very much from the point of view of being a DP. And even when I was doing visual effects, I related with the DPs the most. You know, what they were trying to do, the authors of the image, and how to bring this together and communicate with them in their language. And I still do it today with color. I really do try very hard to see it from that point of view and what their goals were, what, you know, their problems were. Also to speak in their language. I think that's one of the big things that background gives you. It's able to say, oh, okay, I see what you're trying to do here. I see how you were trying to work this out, and to respond to that and say, how can it be worked? An interesting difference between visual effects, I think, and camera department. Camera department and production entirely is very much an army. You have your role, you have your position, you know your responsibilities, you know who you're responsible to up the ladder, who's responsible to you down the ladder. The camera department is a very hierarchical regime with loaders or DITs, camera assistants, second camera assistants, first camera assistants, operators in some cases, and a DP. And there really is a hierarchy there, and there's a chain of command there. And I think that the colorist, in my point of view, the way I like to work it is I'm very much a part of that team. Just I'm the one who comes after they're done shooting. My responsibility is still very much there, like a camera operator or a focus puller, to be part of the cinematographer's team to tell their story and to present their imagery.
Much like an editor, editors are usually not there on set. You can actually provide some perspective to the shots. For instance, they may have been trying to get this shot for 14 hours and they said, this shot has to be in. You don't understand how hard we worked. You can offer that perspective and say, it doesn't really work because of this, this, and this when you're in a controlled environment and in the context of how that works, right?
I think so, and that's an editor's prerogative. That was one of the things I loved learning about when I was in editorial, was how that opportunity to divorce yourself from what went on set, the craziness that went on set, and say, but it works or it doesn't work. And I think the big lesson I had from working in different groups, in different pieces, is I've got to walk a mile or more in each person's shoes, understand what their frustrations and their focus is and where they see it. So there are times when I actually really do look at a project as an editorial approach rather than a DP's approach. I walk this line. I do believe that the editor, as the author of the story, as it evolves, one of the fascinating things about a movie, and from a colorist point of view, or any storytelling, is that it is an evolving process. They say a film is written 3 times, once in pre-production, once during production, and once in post. With my background, with my experience, I have a point of view on just about every phase of the film production. This has resulted in my understanding what the cinematographer brings to it, that they are part of the second rewriting of the project and creation of the imagery. The editor is putting all this together in a story and evolving the story. Our job as colorists is very much of a midwife position. We're there at the birthing of this process. It's only a couple days or a week or 2 or maybe a month where we're involved in it after the other creatives have been on for months. But we help bring this project to life, to the world. In doing so, though, we have to respect the DP as the principal architect of the image, but also how the editor manipulated that to tell a story. And I think our tools speak to both of those.
So because you've had this background with visual effects and color, where's the line between when a colorist should be doing a visual effects shot and when a visual effects artist should be doing a visual effects shot. Let's say Mad Max. There was a ton of sky replacements done, and they were all done in the color bay. Do you think that that's the future? Like, we're going to be doing a lot more VFX shots just because we can and the software can do it? Or do you think it's best done by a visual effects artist?
I think in general, the eyes of the colorist and the eyes of the visual effects artist are both very good eyes. They both bring something tremendous to it. The question isn't who, because it's changing, it's evolving. Films are no longer just a linear pre-production, production, post-production. There's lots of cycling back on itself and changing of the rules in digital. Instead of a line now, it looks more like a mandala, where it's circle and areas inside and very complex approach. I think a lot of it has to do with where people are comfortable working. It also involves money. Everybody has a budget, and everybody wants to use that budget in the best way possible. Something that colorists need to understand about visual effects is that every shot is called out and selected, pulled, sent to visual effects, gets a separate line in the visual effects budget, is worked on, returned, evaluated, and there's a cycle of it. But there's a fair amount of overhead to just pulling it, getting it there, getting it installed in the situation. We used to say that we couldn't touch a shot. We couldn't even touch it for less than X number of dollars. It's very hard to just do it. In the color suite, you've got all the shots anyway. They're there. You're seeing the entire context of the project, and you've got all the creatives there. Still, is it the best use of your time and money? And that's the question that has to be asked. If you've got the time and the ability, sure, you can do it. But I think that in general, if it's CG imagery, obviously that's not something we handle normally. We don't create it. There are things coming that are going to address that. I think that as much as possible, I would try to do it in the visual effects end of things. But if you see things when it gets to color or things change and evolve in color and you go, wow, I wish we did that, having the ability to respond to that with your clients there, then without them having to go through the rigmarole, if you can, I think it's a great thing. And I do think the tools are there. And that's the other thing I would say. History has shown us that the tools can do it, the client's going to ask you to do it. At the same time, I often use the analogy of the pencil. You say, do you know how to use a pencil? And people say, yes. Great. Does that mean you can draw? You can write music? You can write poetry? You can do accounting? All these things that a pencil can do. You're saying if you know how to use a pencil, you're saying you can do all that. Well, no, because the pencil is the tool and it can be used with finesse or clunkiness, but it's how you use it and what you use it for that is really, I think, what makes the artist in any of the senses. And I think the same thing is true here. Just because it can doesn't necessarily mean that it should or that you can. It's outside your skill set. You're very good at one thing and maybe you're not as good as another part of it, even though the software supports it. And there's no reason you should be, by the way.
What tools are still missing from the tool set in the color grading software that you've seen in visual effects that if we want to implement some of these things, what tools do we still need? Look at Lola effects. Mm-hmm. They do a lot of face replacement. They do a lot of changing of the size of eyes and nose, and think of commercials. We're already softening skin, but how long until somebody says, you know, her nose is a little bit too big there. Can we change that? Can we make her thinner? There's a whole nother question of if we should do that. What's your take on that? What tools do we still need if we needed to do warping and things like that as well?
When I got involved in editorial, I very quickly realized there were all these holy wars going on. Which system was better? What should somebody be doing and everything? And it really became a matter of you had to define your genre, if you will, your strata that you were talking about. Are we talking about high-end Hollywood feature films? Are we talking about low-end Hollywood feature films? Are we talking about independents? Are we talking about documentaries? Are we talking about reality TV? Are we talking about broadcast TV? These all have different solutions. We're talking about the sub-$1 million projects. We're talking about the sub-$100,000 projects. These all have their own solutions, and there is no right solution for all of them, or even for the ones at the same level. There were feature films that have been cut on Final Cut 7. That's not standard, but it's happened. So what's right? And I think the same thing is going on here. Not every colorist is going to need these tools or these approaches. The color bay is often a very high-paced, fast turnaround type of place where you need to have your first pass be the right one and move on. If you have the luxury of having more time and can respond, and the client is good with you taking the time to do here, then you can start getting to finesse moves that can improve their storytelling. Or as I say, not leaving any money on the table. And that's, I think, the point here is that is there anything that you can do to make this project that people have sweated, bled, spent fortunes on to make it better, to tell their story better, if there's anything you can do when you touch it to make that happen within the confines of the money and the time that they have, I think you should do it. That's a roundabout way of trying to answer your question. To get specific.
Do you think that rotoscoping is a skill a colorist needs to have? As colorists, can you give us any advice about how to do any rotoscoping?
Do a lot of it. I think it's part of the tool chest when you have the time to do it. Still, we do a lot of it, and I do a lot of it in my work because it's what I'm good at. In fact, I've been told by some people that if I want to get better, I should stop doing it and just try and work the primaries. But, you go with what your strengths are. I think to get good at it, learn your tools, your tracking tools, use tracking wherever possible to give yourself a basic skeleton of the motion, and then tweak as little as possible to get your shape to conform. But even if your basic track is solid and your shape isn't 100%, it won't give itself away the way that just a hand roto might if you're not experienced with it. So use those tools of tracking, then tweak where you need on top of that. Be subtle with it, use your eyes. Be aware that human motion is far more complex than you think it is. By that I mean people don't tend to constantly move. They tend to move, stop, in that way. So experience will teach you how people move, but it's putting in the reps really that will make you better at it.
Both The Revenant and Bridge of Spies, they were both done in Luster. Mm-hmm. And we always say, you choosing the right software for the right job. Why so often on these jobs do they go to Luster instead of something else?
Well, you can say the right tool for that job, but as much as anything in this business, it's the right person for the right job. And it's the tool used by the people that they're working with. I'm working at Technicolor. The lead colorist at Technicolor, Steve Scott, Mike Hatzer, use Luster. If you went to Skip Kimball, he's going to use Resolve. If you go to Maxine Gervais, she's going to use Baselight. So it's your talent you're going for and not what brand of paint they're buying. Because my flame background, Luster was a fairly natural one for me to get into. It still is a bit different than Flame. It's not a direct translation to get into it, but it was a fairly easy one for me even after, I'd learned Resolve. So I came up to speed fairly quickly with it and I understand what the tool sets are there. So I don't think it's so much a Luster thing. I think it's more the artist thing. I think that any of us who've worked on multiple platforms can say, I really like this about platform A. I really wish platform B could do that. And platform C would be infinitely better if it had both of those parts from A and B, but what it does here, this other thing it does, is phenomenal. I wish the other ones had it. So I think every colorist at one level or another wants to Franken system something that they pull from it. And for me, there's a lot of aspects I wish more of them had of Photoshop. I love the way I'm seeing all of them moving. They're all moving towards a integration of more VFX tools. Resolve, of course, is bringing in Fusion, which I think is to its plus. Luster in 2017 has made a real leap forward by bringing in the connection to Flare, which is for those who don't know, is a subset of the overall Flame, but it's the very powerful subset. It's a very good move forward. Baselight is continuing to innovate in their ways, and with the 5.0 coming up, it's got some really effects-oriented aspects they're bringing in. A lot of things I've seen in their system already, even the older systems that were very cool from an effects point of view. New Coda also has some very nice effects connections. So the move is there, the ability is there. It's a question of can the colorist and the project take advantage of them.
The other thing that's interesting about Luster, and I don't know if this is just because of the way the artists work, many of them don't use panels. They're using keyboard, mouse, tablet. Mm-hmm. Do you think that affects things as well?
It does in a couple interesting ways. I think long ago I heard you in your previous incarnation talk about how you guys could really tell which systems created which projects. You could see as a result, and I think there is an aspect to that. When I first got on Luster, it performed in a way that I really thought really was nice. It's very buttery. It's very silky for me. I was very sympathetic to Luster, even though there's a lot about it that is a color system only, unlike Baselight or Resolve, which bring in some more editorial and everything. Yes, there's editorial in Luster, but it really is a very strong color-focused tool. My experience on the other systems versus Luster, and the fact that many Luster colorists I've worked with don't use panels, I've looked at it and tried to figure out why. I think that in the log grading mode, the way that Luster has laid out their keyboard shortcuts and the fact that they utilize printer lights so well, they've done a very good job of making you not need a panel. If you're the type of colorist that does a lot of articulated roto, that means you're picking up the mouse or the tablet a lot to do your work. After I'd spent some time with them, with working without a panel, I actually did bring in my panels and worked with them, but I found that I didn't really use them that much if I was working in the mode and in the style of the people that I was working with. It's not necessary. It's very well organized for that, for use without a panel, luster and log mode. I think if I was doing linear mode, which is more Rec 709 type grading, I would almost certainly want to have panels. But that's not what we do. An interesting thing does come out of this. Because the colorists who do panelless, just keyboard only, use the hotkeys for printer lights, the clients can hear the clicking. And they often say, how many clicks was that? And, 3. Take it back 1. This sort of thing goes on. And I think that's a good feedback for working with their clients, whereas they can't tell how far you spun the knob or worked the ball. On the opposite end, I'm learning Bakelite right now. It's fascinating how that system really, to me, demands to have its panel. Although I understand there are Bakelite colorists that don't really use the panel. They use the GUI and they work very much without it. But
Right, like the Peter Doyles of the world.
The Peter Doyles of the world. But for me so far, what I've seen working both with and without the panel, I would like to have the panel. Maybe when I get to Peter's level, I'll be able to jettison it, but not today.
What drives a lot of people to Luster, as you said, is the integration with Flame. And I see it used on a lot of VFX heavy shows. Are there tools in that are specifically geared towards working with that workflow?
I wouldn't say so, actually, to be honest with you. It's not so much that. I think there's still a lot that can be done to drive visual effects and color together that hasn't happened yet and that I would like to see happen. Pretty much our entire systems are mostly driven by real name, time code, and that's all based on live action because there never is a overlap of running time and shot and camera. And so between real name and time code, you have a pretty unique shot. Visual effects, though, is constantly walking over its own footsteps, reversioning. This final piece may have its individual time code and real name, but is that version 5? Is version 17? Is it version 38? We don't have a easily tracked method of the version reversioning other than more or less hand replacing and dropping it on in. The other thing that I think is very much missing in this equation is the use of mattes, of external mattes coming from visual effects. And this is where you're going to combine CG and live action in the color suite. There definitely is a point of view that the visual effects people don't really want the colors to be messing with their balance, carefully created balance. At the same time, if they've gone through the effort to create a matte, it is for the production's purpose. If it can save time in the color suite, instead of rotoring it or keying it, if they can just get the matte that was created by VFX to say, here's this character, and I need to darken, brighten, get a little red out now that the colors of the scene have changed since they originally saw it, because that happens all the time, then that saves time in the color suite, and that also benefits the production. So I think one of the big missing things is the idea that we should have a timeline for the mattes. That instead of each matte being individually brought in to the shot as an element into that shot, we pretty much know where the mattes are and what it's supposed to be. They have a correspondence to the shot they're with. Maybe we need a couple timelines if you have a couple characters or different mattes. Often a complex shot will have several different mattes, even when you combine them into what we call a disco map, where it's a different matte on the red, green, blue, and alpha layer. Even with that, you can have dozens of mattes. I think a timeline that you could conform, but it conforms to mattes, would be a very good way to accessing that and keeping it up to date as things evolve and change, as they often do. We are looking at a future of EXR files, and this will be part of our future evolution. And EXR not only allows you to have several images, but most importantly, it allows you to have many layers of mattes coming along. It unfortunately means it's a very heavy file. We will probably develop a proxy situation where you don't get access to the full EXR unless you ask for it. But what a wonderful way of making sure everything is there in sync and is constantly there. So maybe you're going along through your timeline just using the first 4 layers of EXR, and then you go, wow, I really wish I had, just like we go from proxy to full resolution, I really wish I had access to the entire thing. Boom, you can drop down to layer 27 where the map for the dinosaur is and pull that up and utilize that. I think that would be a great thing, and it is coming. One other aspect of this I think that is colorists don't know, and I think we'll see some people doing this. This happened back on iRobot at Digital Domain when they were first working with EXR files. It's expensive to re-render CG to change things in CG. And by expensive, I mean machine cycles. And that has its cost. So what they ended up doing for iRobot was they ended up rendering a highlight pass, a diffuse pass, a shadow pass, and they had all the passes rendered in the EXR file in separate layers. And then it was in composite that they tweaked and changed the ratios to create a finished look. It was supposed to be very semi-transparent. They saved money by doing that because it just made it easier to make adjustments in lighting than just re-rendering the whole thing again, baking in the lighting. I could see something like that happening to colorists, of getting all the information, working its way on down the line to the colorist, where it's all in place and you go, well, could you just change that? And I think that is a possibility on certain projects that they will end up changing, being the people in charge of color and balance and everything. They will have a say in that and how that works. And it certainly could come down to us. Besides that, I would love to see head models that we can access for lighting and relighting. Pretty much we know that most of what we're interested in as colorists is often faces and lighting of those and keying of those. I would imagine I would love to see a skin tone keyer. Something just, we've got a green keyer, we've got these things, but how about a keyer that really is dialed up for skin tone? I think that would be a real nice tool for us to have. Warping, tracking, all these things, I think will have their place, but would the day-to-day colorists need them? Probably not. I think there will be a horse for courses sort of thing where people get what they need for their projects, but I don't think every colorist needs to have access to every one of these tools, though.
So since we're talking about the workflow, you have been involved a lot with ACES. You're in the Academy. What do you think of how it's been accepted? Do you think that there's still anything holding us back from using it?
I think the biggest thing from holding us back from using it is familiarity. A couple of years ago, if you'd asked me, I would have said, well, I think there's a lot holding it back. But I think a lot of those have gone away. People are finding out that they can use ACES in ways that still gives them the individual control that they want. I think that's a big fear at some of the higher end houses. Let's not forget that we're up to just ACES 1.0. We've gone through this rollout period, but it seems like every color system now has access to ACES. Just yesterday, a new ACES workflow document dropped from ARI, created by people who are very much involved with the Academy. The Academy themselves is doing a lot to roll it out. They're constantly trying to get people to use it. There are projects coming along every day for it, or that have been done with it every day. It's gaining acceptance, but I think the big thing is people are finding that it's not just a one-size-fits-all sort of thing, in that they can't customize it to their needs. And that was, I think, the big fear originally. But now they're finding that they can do a lot of tweaks within it to achieve what they want to do. I think, especially as we get into HDR, high dynamic range, it's really going to have a very strong place at that table.
So along the same lines as the workflow, since you do a lot of shows that are heavy in VFX, there's been a debate about when you should color correct an image. Should you do it before VFX, during, or after? What's your take on it?
For me, and this goes back to my experience in visual effects, I got burned one time on a project that I did some very delicate VFX of a smoke trail. That was supposed to be just below white, and then it went to DI, and they color corrected in such a way that my delicate white smoke trails became crunchy gray. Basically what we call in effects, they broke the effect. This is where visual effects people don't like DI people. So after that, and this was early days of DI, I'll point out, I insisted that we go to something that's much more like the commercial color correction model, where you color correct before you do your VFX. When I was doing visual effects, I started asking for the projects, the pieces, to be pre-color corrected, ballparked, as you said. Put it where you're going to think it's going to be in terms of contrast and brightness. Don't clip anything. Don't make any permanent decisions. Obviously, no windows or anything, no secondaries. But let me know where this is going to live, because as we know, it can live anywhere, up and down, bright, dark, have you. And that can have a material effect on the visual effects. So I firmly believe that the color correction should be done prior to visual effects working on it, not only so that the visual effects artists have the context of the shot and knowing how their work is going to go together, but also so they can see continuity across their shots, and so that the people judging it, the clients, are going to be able to see it as much closer to what it's going to be in their movie. If we've seen any trend over the past 20 years, it's a tightening of quality control and presentation throughout the entire post-production pipeline. Editorial now has better color-corrected monitors. They used to not care. They were just, if there's an image and I can recognize it, that was good enough. But now they're actually part of presenting an image that if it looks different than the client sees in other places, they're going to be unhappy. So we have editorial having to get into color correct viewing environments, if not correction themselves. Visual effects, they're expected to present it the way that the client's used to seeing it. And obviously when it gets to DI, they want to see it looking the way they've been expecting to see it before you start making creative changes. That can just mean providing a CDL for them to use without actually baking anything in. A relatively newer, although it's been being done for years, but it gives the visual effects facility not only access to the raw imagery as shot, but also a context to which to view it and see how their visual effects will look.
Also, a lot of your movies, they're still being done with stereoscopic. Is there any specific challenges in color? Because you need to get through those glasses, you need to make the image brighter. And just from a workflow and management perspective, it's a lot as well. What's your take on working with stereoscopic?
Well, stereoscopic these days is meaning several things. Most of what I've worked on has been post-stereo instead of stereo original. So we work on a mono first. A lot of people, if they know they're going to go stereo, will try to make their shapes and their imagery fairly soft so that when they split, like big soft shapes and everything, big general color corrections rather than anything really tight and articulated. The thought there being that when it goes to stereo from the mono, you just copy your color across to both eyes, and your shape is so big and soft that you don't notice the disparity between the eyes. Well, that's not the way that I've been doing it with the team I work with. Whatever the shape is that works in mono is what we take to stereo. We make sure that the shapes are offset between the eyes, that they only move in X, of course, that you want no vertical offset. If a character is coming from deep to far, or whatever your roto is going from deep to far, then you do need to actually track it out, because that shape will not just keep its constant offset between the eyes, it needs to vary as the stereo depth changes. And then when it gets to the color aspect, once you've got all the shapes worked out, once you get to the color aspect of it, yes, you're working with a much darker image, and you're going to need to go in and trim, usually bring down some highlights that are glaring at that point. We're not a problem at 14-foot Lamberts, but at 3.5, they become quite obvious. On the other hand, we are seeing now stereo that is being actually color corrected for about 14-foot Lamberts. So in that case, you need to do very little, actually, other than make sure your shapes are all doing the right thing. The one other thing that does happen, and this has to do with what's called hits and windows, and that's what happens when objects either go on and off the screen.
Right, you're talking about floating windows.
Exactly. Not color correction windows, but floating windows. That's all part of it. We're seeing things like SDL, stereo decision lists, coming from teams of stereographers whose job is just to handle that and turn it over to color correction and say, well, here's what we want to do. And then maybe we'll adjust it a little bit once we see everything working together. And then one other odd thing that does happen with the stereo is sometimes a object will be revealed by one eye but not in the other. And this creates a conflict. It's what would be considered stereo bump. Sometimes we'll use our tools to make the bump less apparent. Even though it's not strictly what should be done, it's what looks right. As we all do, we make those decisions.
So from your unique perspective of going from camera, editorial, VFX, color, so what's next? What's next for this industry?
Oh, the industry.
And for you. Sure.
I like this. I think I'm at the point where I'm hoping this is what's going to carry me to the end. Industry. Wow. Well, there's so many things going on. I love, actually, for me, this is a very exciting time. We've got high dynamic range. We've got Rec 2020 color coming in hand with that. We've got ACES. Here's the important part about ACES. ACES is a huge playing field. A lot of us are familiar with what Rec 709 looks like and what 2020 looks like to some degree, P3, these limited spaces, but these are pretty good. ACES doesn't have that limit. It is effectively, for the human eye, limitless. It's not the limiting factor. It provides access to any of these other color spaces and maybe even things beyond when we finally get there. Even Rec 2020 doesn't encompass the entirety of human vision. We're seeing the opportunity to go beyond that. Not this week, and probably not for a couple more years, but we still don't even have today in 2016, we don't really have a Rec 2020 monitor that we consider to be a grading quality monitor. But the opportunities are there, the opening is there. The other thing is we're seeing so many more distribution routes that open up things for colors, and these include VR coming along. I think a lot of the work we've been doing in high resolution, high frame rate, wide color gamut, high dynamic range makes a lot of sense in a little 2-inch sensor in front of your eye instead of a 60-foot screen. It's very exciting from all that. Where is this going to go in 20 years? Maybe having this discussion about holograms. But I think in general, it's a very exciting time for all this stuff to be going on. There's a lot of activity in the color world, and we really need to keep on top of it because it's changing daily.
Yeah.
8K coming, and beyond.
Which makes a big difference, as you say, for VR. Most of the colorists that I've talked to, they're not super excited about higher resolutions, but when the screen is that close to your eyes in VR, that 4K or higher could make a big difference.
It can. It's going to be all about the eye's ability to resolve dot patterns and everything. I keep on talking about the Turing test, which is where you know whether or not a computer is a person or a computer. And I think the Turing test for VR is going to be when you can have one eye live, just looking out, and one eye is a screen and you don't know which is which. We're a ways away from that today, no matter what my Vive friends say. But it's fascinating to watch that develop. I think HDR for me is the most fascinating thing going on right now. It is proving to me better pixels over more pixels. Every time I see it, and every time I see it used well, it is just literally breathtaking to me. I'm just so excited to do it. And it's the fun thing about HDR is, as I mentioned to me, it's more FDR, full dynamic range. We're finally getting access to the entire dynamic range of the camera, or close to it. Now, we hope that over time the cameras will go even further and maybe eventually come even closer to what the human eye can handle as far as dynamic range. In the meantime, we have access to pretty much the entire camera's dynamic range. And the one downside to that is, as I was talking to some friends last night, I have weird friends, it's going to mean that the DPs are going to need to nail their exposures better. Because while we're used to being able to slide their exposure up and down our limited 9 or 10 stop range and move that up and down to get to when we start getting to the full 14, 15, you can't slide it up and down. There's nowhere to go. They're going to have to nail it better.
You do a lot of cinema, and you have a perspective on that. And in a cinema, you have a completely darkened environment. You can't even see your hand in front of your face in a cinema that's doing HDR. How are we going to deal with that at home? Because that's going to be the case of wide adoption. It's going to have to be like we had stereo TVs, for better or worse. That's how that technology really took a foothold. What are the challenges, in your opinion, to doing that in a home environment?
There really are two HDR things. I just want to make clear on that. There's theatrical HDR, which is in a controlled, dark environment with a certain maximum foot Lambert. And mostly what you're getting is out of that is maybe a little brighter image, a more colorful image, but you're also getting some really rich blacks that you didn't have before. So in most ways, in the theater, you're getting more on the bottom end of the scale and a little bit more on the top end. More color. It's just amazing. In the home environment, in broadcast HDR, it's a different thing. Yes, you're getting a little more black, and that's great, but that's often limited by your viewing environment. But they're getting a lot more on the top end. So it flips the equation a little bit. I don't think it really changes. The limits have always been what the limits have been. You know what's going to be in your room. You know that once it leaves your room into the wild, wild world, fly and be free. You hope it's going to hold up. You think you've done all you can to make sure it will hold up by sticking to some very strict limits of ambient light in your room, 100 nit, and what have you. Once it leaves that room, you know it's free range. You hope that it holds up, but there's no guarantee. And I don't think we're going to have any more guarantee with HDR. There's talks about getting equivalents of THX mode and everything. This is what the DPs often talk about, making sure that their creative intent is followed through to the very end. Certainly there are efforts being made along those lines. But at the end of the day, most consumers go into Best Buy or what have you, look at the ones and go, I like that one. That's pretty. That's bright. That's grabbing me, whatever it is. And that's what's going to sell it at the end of the day. There'll be the cinephiles or who are going to really dig it, and the rest of you is going to go, this is cool looking.
The comments you had earlier about ACES and HDR together, though, that starts to make a lot of sense because somebody could be watching something on their phone. Somebody could be watching something on their tablet. Nobody has really said anything about that yet, but ACES ODTs will account for that, right?
The ODTs will, that's the output device transform. Basically the things that say, okay, which device do you want to go to for this run of the render? Which one of these is going to be your selected output? It will, to a certain extent. I don't think at this point it's really down to iPhone versus iPad Pro or anything like that. But certainly, sRGB. The stories I've heard from the field are that people feel that their ability to output the different, do different trim outs are significantly sped up through ACES, that they don't need to spend as much time. That's certainly one of the benefits of it, is saving time and money. When it comes to individual selection of it, I think it's up to the devices ultimately to make sure they represent a Rec 709 or sRGB image in a reasonable fashion. It'll be interesting to see how they'll handle as we shift to an HDR primary distribution mode, which I don't think is going to happen. It's going to be a long time before we're going to see HDR as the primary output. And in the meantime, SDR, it'll be the dominant. By that I mean standard dynamic range, what we're used to. It's still going to be the primary mode and the most requested way of color. More eyeballs will see it that way for a long time. I don't want to predict, because I do know that I've got a lot of friends that created the DCI standard, and when I talk to them, they all kind of shake their heads and say, we didn't expect it to happen that fast. So I've taken that as a lesson and done predicting any timelines. It will happen. It's compelling. I don't know how fast it will happen. I don't think HDR is going to do what stereo did. 3D did, where it kind of came, had its heyday, and went away. I personally feel it's here for the long haul, because it's just that compelling. It's that much better looking. They've made it accessible at a consumer level. There's no reason not to do it. One thing I do want to say about HDR, it basically can easily be said this one goes to 11. Just because it can doesn't mean it should. A lot of people I'm talking to who are experiencing it, DPs and so forth, not every scene should be pulled out to its maximum dynamic range. It's a creative tool, something that can be used to help tell a story. Maybe the highlights in the water near your character get a little brighter, go a little more up into the dynamic range than the highlights elsewhere to drive your eye to it. Colors can be, but there's certainly still going to be scenes that won't even go to standard dynamic range. It's a creative tool still, not just a technical tool. On the other hand, I was talking to a gentleman yesterday who said the place that HDR really seems it's going to knock the socks off is sports, live sports. That it just is so compelling and so much more dynamic. What's interesting is all these things we're doing, in one way or another, are bringing the imagery closer to you. They're all bringing it more into your home, into your presence. The big word used in VR, presence and immersion. All these steps, whether it was 3D a couple years ago, high dynamic range now, higher resolution. Besides the fact it gives certain people a chance to sell more units, it also gives the viewer the feeling, getting closer to the imagery and hopefully to the storytelling or the drama of the sport.
Thank you, Gray, for joining me. It's been a lot of fun talking to you. If somebody wants to contact you or see your work, where can they reach you?
Well, I'm kind of very bad at that, to be honest with you, Josh. I should be better. I think the best way to reach me, considering your audience and everything, is you can find me on Lift Gamma Gain. I'm very responsive there. Follow me and direct message me on Twitter at Gray Marshall. It's Gray. Be happy to hear from people and see what cool things they're up to.
Cool. Thank you, Gray.
Thank you.